Welcome to Charge Chat for Tuesday, April 30th, 2019. Let's see, I'll drop the meeting minutes into chat here. There's only one item on it, but I do have two more, and one of them involves Locky.
Great.
Yeah.
I'd show my camera, but for whatever reason, it's not on my display. So I'd rather not leave the meeting and come back.
Okay.
I'm not intentionally not showing my face.
You're on Mac, right?
Yeah. Do I need to boot a service like Core Audio D?
There's a service you can boot. I'll drop it into here. I actually here's the thing. I have to do this often enough. This works for me most of the time.
Give it a try.
I typed sudo up and it was the first thing.
Oh.
It may or may not work. It depends on what's captured the device. Okay. It depends on what's got a hold of it. All right. But the first thing is a pull request somebody submitted to move us to multiple issue templates for pull requests, for bug reports, for feature requests. Have you all seen this yet? This ability?
I have not.
So when you go to create a new issue, it'll ask you, what type of issue do you want to create? A bug report or a feature request? Right, for the different types of issues. So it actually gives you the ability to have different types of things and have different labels, titles, things like that as part of it in the details. And so this pull request goes ahead and does that. And I thought it might be worth talking about. What do we think about it? I'm cool with it. I kind of like the idea of having the different types. It makes people think. But
yeah, I have actually used that before. I haven't implemented it, but I've been a consumer of this process, and it was quite good. I was like, "What's this?" Oh, yes, drop down. So, anything we can do to guide people to not create issues that we aren't going to action, I think is beneficial.
I agree. Yeah. Does it let you specify the title? Because one of the things that is mentioned in this issue is the fact that there's a convention of doing stable/Jenkins or incubator/Jaeger or whatever the chart is in the title, which makes it easier to search. So I wonder if it looks like from the blog post, you can't really configure the title.
You can't on the fly, it doesn't look like. So we have a piece of code that I meant to deploy to bot. I actually wrote a bot that will check for that and then tell people to modify their title for that. And I've totally been terrible and I haven't deployed the code. It's there. It's on the Helm repo, so it's on the Helm org somewhere. But we have code to actually check for this in a bot, and I've just been terrible. And every time I see a reminder of it, I'm like, I need to go do that. But it's there.
Oh, actually, there is a default issue title that you can set.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can do that.
So overall, this looked generally good to me, but I thought I'd bring it up since it's changing your issues. Okay. I can follow up on it after the call, unless somebody else wants to.
What is the issue, by the way? Sorry, I was a few minutes late, guys.
The issue was, excuse me. There's the ability to have multiple issue templates and issue types.
Oh, sorry, I meant what was the issue number? Yeah, thanks.
The issue is 13201.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw that too. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Docs. All right. So it looks good. The next thing that I had that I thought worth discussing was with the Helm Hub, and it actually Locky. And so this is it's the pull request that has to do with MML Spark.
Is this number pull request 65, I believe?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets into an interesting thing with it in that the person who has suggested it is somebody I can find no traceability to the project on, which made me nervous. right? And the only reason I've been poking you on it, obviously, is it's a Microsoft project, MML Spark. It's Azure/MML Spark is where the project is at on GitHub. And so this makes me nervous because they created their own container images, didn't use the official ones. I can't find any tie to them. So even though they switched to the official, right, as soon as we merge it, they could just switch back. And what's going to be in those containers that, above and beyond what's in the official containers? They look like they're about the same size. They're not exactly the same. The builds aren't exactly the same. So what's in there? What does this mean? And how do we deal with trust like this, right? And so that's kind of where I wanted to loop folks in on. It's issue 65. And, this person may be totally legit. I have no idea. But it comes to how do we deal with trust on these things, because right now we're really not monitoring anything, even though we probably need to get some of that rolling. My charts time has been spent on the charts repo doing lots of reviews and not enough time over here getting this into better shape. So what do y'all think about trust, and how do we figure that out? And this is just an example of it because it's the first time it's somebody who I can't traceably get into the fold on this and say, ooh, they work over here. I know where the throat to choke is, right? I know if there's a problem, this is where we go and how we deal with it. And they seem very, very reputable. They're part of an organization we know. They're tied to the thing, stuff like that. This is the first time in Outsiders.
I mean, my first thought is that it's only an issue for the mono repo. The distributed repos, they'll be able to govern themselves.
No. It's an issue for us merging it in, though, because
yes.
Yeah, because in this case, they had created their own images for MML Spark, a Microsoft thing, and so I'm not going to have time to audit those images and what's really in them, and I don't have that person trust change in this particular case.
Yeah, I don't know how to rationalize it. I mean, for me personally, this specific one was when I went and pulled the chart apart. It was the same as the fork of the PR. It's the same as the upstream chart with the PR merged. And I'm like, why would you just do that? Why not wait? Scott's already reviewing the upstream chart. How do you trust anyone or anything? And do we want everybody to BYO repo? Because a number of different things are like red flags for me. I think they were going to move images to official repos, but it was all under somebody's personal project. I don't know.
Well, where's MML Spark at is it an incubator?
MML's but I think it's up just incubator Spark.
Okay.
Not MML Spark. So there's a PR that's doing these exact changes to the Spark chart that Scott has been reviewing.
There's that one.
Yeah, it's that pull request.
Yeah, this one's unstable.
That's stable.
You're right. It's not clear. He's saying that Mark Hamilton can vouch for him. I guess we can ask.
As in Luke Skywalker? It means Mark Hamill, not Mark Hamilton.
Yeah.
I don't know. If we start drawing lines about who to trust and who not to trust, it's going to get very slippery for us.
Well, it's not just that, because if I go look at the Spark chart, right, the image is also, it's not just a change in the PR, it's a change in the image to his personal image. And that's what originally
that's why I'm not accepting that PR.
Okay.
Yeah, he did say he'll move the images in the chart repo to an official Microsoft Docker Hub.
Right, and again, it's like that. For me, it's like, why are we changing from the official things? Wow, is GCR/Spark even official?
I think the only reason that I would suggest doing that is because that's our eventual move anyway. But that's a separate issue, right? This issue has to be resolved one way or the other. If it becomes distributed, that's great, but we still would probably like to recommend putting it in an official space.
So I think, and I'd like some guidelines along the way. So I think one of the guidelines that I noticed here that we could probably capture is that the person involved in doing the pull request and creating the chart repository isn't related to the project itself, but is claiming to be, right? Somehow related to it, and it can have folks verify for it. And in the support area, not just that, but in the maintainers area, they put the project people, not themselves. And so if something went wrong, we try to contact the project, which has no relation to or control over the charts repository. And so that link of maintainership for me would be an issue. And this just occurred to me.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the repository itself is a GitHub page.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't look official to me. The other thing is the chart name is just Spark. It's not MML Spark, and it still has me listed as a maintainer in that repository, of which I'm not. So it's just clearly a fork. So it's just a little sloppy for me. It's basically a fork with that PR merge, the one that Scott just posted, from what I can tell. So I don't mind. I don't mind, but if we can't trace it back to have a throat choke, because you almost want to send an email to the maintainer and say, hey, we're lighting up this chart, just letting you know if anything goes wrong, we're going to be shooting you email. Can somebody who's not the person who raised the thing vouch for the fact that they're going to answer this email?
Yeah.
Like just some lightweight verification, whoever's listed as the maintainer.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what are you proposing in terms of guidelines?
Well, it says he's part of the MML Spark team. Part of the team working on MML Spark, but I couldn't find any traceability on that.
Yeah, I mean, he does work for Microsoft. I know that, and he does.
He does.
He is in that team inside Microsoft, but that's not publicly accessible.
Yeah, I was
for everything. So I have access to insider knowledge. Assume I don't have that access.
Yeah. Mark, who's been on the other PR, is like the main contributor to MML Spark in the Azure repo, and that's public. And so I was thinking he would be able to help build that trust, But yeah, that's interesting, Lockie.
No, and that's good to know because he doesn't represent himself as being. He says he's on the team, but I don't know. And is MML Spark different from regular Spark?
I don't know. I don't know anything about that project.
Okay, because it labels itself as, it's Microsoft Machine Learning for Apache Spark. So I can understand why they'd have a different chart and different images and things like that, possibly. And why it would be different than the regular Spark. Okay.
I think that's a good point, Jacob. We had talked about moving this to a self-service, but at this stage we're not. But you're right. Before it becomes self-service, we are taking some responsibility for what we merge in.
And even when it becomes self-service, we have to have an ability to handle abuse too. Mm-hmm. So right now everything is a bit lightweight and loose, and I do want to be accommodating, but I am aware that there are nefarious people out there, and trying to look for social cues and things like that to get it. So, Lockie, it's great that it's somebody. I think I
kind of just want to take this whole PR back and throw it to the people who I kind of personally want a official Azure chart repo, and then things somehow delegate the management to that under Azure/charts, and then create that properly and delegate the merges to some team back internally, and then come to Helm Hub with a proper, here are the Azure charts. Not just one-off, because, if we set precedents that companies like Microsoft can bring any project under any thing, I just don't know that that's a precedence I want to set on behalf of Microsoft. I don't think this person has that intention, but he's not looking at the bigger picture.
No, yeah, and from a Microsoft standpoint, I would suggest having one repository where you can go and get everything, rather than scattered ones for all these departments and you don't know how to find it. From an external user experience, it would be much better. So, yeah.
All right, well, let me take the action on following that up internally.
Okay.
And then I'm just going to I'll put a comment publicly.
Yeah.
Just about, I think, what I just said.
That makes sense.
Don't merge. I think we could continue to do, sorry, Scott, we could continue to riff on his PR against the upstream chart. But the thing is, I don't know why he wants to commandeer the MML Spark thing with the official Spark upstream, because they're two different flavors, as far as I can tell. I don't want to conflate the two.
That's a good issue too.
It's not clear. Yeah, and from an approving case, I think the lack of connections between people and organizations, passing the sniff test is an important one for us. And this is the first time, like, I could not relate him back to Microsoft. And so it seemed like there's a Microsoft mailing list, and then there's somebody who's doing it on his own, separate from Microsoft, but Microsoft official. That doesn't seem like the right way. That doesn't pass the sniff test for me. And so in the future, I will continue to ask questions about that if somebody else does the same thing, just to make sure it all passes the sniff tests and all the I's are dotted. Because, like, if you have under a person's thing, but it's related to a company and they leave the company, then what?
Yeah, you need to have better setup. No, I agree totally 100% with the way you're handling this. So don't worry. I think we can do better, but leave it with me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
I have more questions. I hate to say, because I love how that shaped up, and I agree with that. But I'm really glad you brought up those several issues, Lucky, because, like, I didn't know those were different projects. That's totally separate. That makes.
Yeah, so basically you might want to go back and say, this doesn't look like Spark. It's MML Spark, which is, a flavor of Spark. So
right,
probably best to link the other thing back and say, hey, how about we go and put in the Helm Hub, we close this one up, we leave this as just upstream Spark.
Yeah.
And your flavor of Spark becomes another chart. I think it's just experience.
That makes perfect sense. I have no experience using Spark, so thank you. Secondly, with what we were saying with the organization stuff, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think that regardless of how they do it, whether it's one repo or many repos, as long as it's under an official org like Azure, it would really be a help. It would at least help us identify. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and I hate to say it, is that on the Helm Hub now, we have a number of different repos that are hosted by individuals, and they are not official, and we never really said they had to be. So I think part of the idea, if I remember before or initially, is that we were going to allow it to be a bit more promiscuous, but just to be very clear about where they're coming from. So, like Locky, you could have your own Helm repo with things that are for projects that some of them you're officially working on, some you're totally not, and that's totally cool. And then someone could say, well, should I try Locky's version of that chart, or should I do the official one from Azure?
Yeah, I think that's valid, and that happens in containers now. But we just have to have them namespaced right. I think
Well,
if
people will jump on namespaces. Yeah, for me.
Oh, totally.
For me, the big red flag was the listing of the maintainers being Microsoft, while the particular person, their org, and the images weren't related to Microsoft.
Yes.
That's the discrepancy that caught my technical attention for merger, because it's like, hey, I'm claiming to be somebody else that, I can't verify that you are. And if you were that organization, they're not going to say, hey, just stick it under one random member of our organization's stuff. It's that connection that I see as the technical problem, because I agree with Scott. We can stick lots of stuff in here, and that was the intent. In this case, I'm more interested in people trying to fake it. Hey, I'm faking being another organization and doing something nefarious that way, and attempting to catch bad actors.
Yeah, or even unintentionally being confusing.
Yeah, and people will do some things that are unintentionally confusing, and we'll probably let them in. In this case, I was more interested in nefarious actors because they're out there constantly doing stuff. And so my brain is always just trying to say, is this actually the right thing? And that connection between email list of the maintainer and where the stuff was at, that didn't fit.
I think to Lockie's point as well, namespacing is important, because I think that repo was added as MML Spark, which gives it some sort of official notion. If it was just this user's username or something, I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick anecdote of when a Chinese company jumped on AKS in Kubernetes conformance. and it made me think that and we had to go solve that because I could have created something called GKE and gone and stepped on, and it's my own personal Kubernetes distribution because they haven't trademarked that name. So that was a fun one.
Yeah. Naming's fun, especially when everybody's trying to limit it to US ASCII.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually learned that in China, there's lots of domain names that are just numbers because it's shorthand for Chinese characters and because everything's like numbers in US ASCII. So lots of domain names that are just numbers are really just Chinese shorthand, so to speak. It's interesting what we do to get around our language and character sets with the internet. Okay.
I have to bounce,
Okay.
but I will take this one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to have to leave early.
That's all right.
Ciao.
Yeah. Ciao.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I had actually related to Monocular and Helm, and so it's really not technically part of charts, but it is kind of the way chart search fits into Helm. And so does anybody have anything else first before since Adnan's here, I wanted to take advantage of that.
Only that I wanted to point you to this PR that Adnan, I wanted to point you to this PR that Matt already started reviewing. I just wanted to get your view on it too, Adnan, when you get a chance.
Yeah, sorry, I've been a bit out of the loop these last couple of weeks, been traveling a bit.
Oh, no worries. There's probably nothing really beyond what Matt already said, but I just know that you have been working on the deployment side of things too, and I just wanted you to be aware of it at least. But that's really it. I don't have anything to really discuss. It's just about automating the pushes.
Oh, cool. This would be cool.
Yeah.
Matt, related to the previous discussion, do we already have guidelines in place for what you should be checking for? I mean, it's mostly common sense when we're looking at merging pull requests to Hub, especially new repositories. Do you think that's something that should be fleshed out more?
Probably. So that way we are all aware and on the same page, and maybe some of it we can even automate then. Because if we start to flesh it out, then it becomes something that's automatable and we're all on the same page on. So yeah, totally. That's a good thing to have.
So we don't have a review guidelines doc for this repo. That might be I don't know, we could follow what we did before in charts. But there's a proposal for this that we all discussed and Matt originally wrote up for the hub that we could for the Helm hub.
Which proposal? There's a repositories document in the hub. Is that what you're talking about?
Am I completely totally off?
Oh, you mean in the community repo?
In the community repo, that I was just thinking we could refer back to.
In the proposals folder, it is called distributed search.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about, and we could potentially at least refer back to that as we're sort of picking out the pieces that we had all discussed and decided on. That's just, I think, the one place where it's official. Yeah. I know we had. I know Adnan and I had written a bunch of stuff, but I think it really never landed any place that we all agreed on in terms of point by point. Okay. So I don't know.
Mm.
If it's in a pull request somewhere, it's still in the pull request related to this.
I was looking at the repositories document, and it's sort of talking about some well, it's not geared towards reviewers looking for things.
No.
Yeah.
It's geared towards somebody who's going to be submitting something.
Right.
The very whole thing was not a reviewer's process, but a submitter's process. And now it's probably worth us having something for reviewers. So is that something you want to write?
I could take a crack at it.
Sounds great. Yeah, be careful what you bring up. We know how to delegate around here.
No worries.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so the thing that I have, so one of the things that we're moving on, and it's the stable charts repository is automatically added to Helm v2. And that means when you do Helm search, you out of the box just get to search the stable repository for anything in it. Well, on Helm 3, that's gone, right? And we want to then switch things up to be able to search the hub. So then we've got Monocular. This is all about searching charts, and it's in Helm. And so the very first thing is to be able to search and have a good search API for Helm or any other tool to call the Helm hub. And so Adnan, since you're here, there is a pull request where I started to work on it. I haven't gotten very far because I wanted feedback. That's why it's even marked as a draft. I use that draft feature. If you didn't know, there's the ability to create a draft PR that cannot be merged on GitHub. And so there's the thing. And Adnan, you'd asked me what I was thinking about why the current internal search didn't work. And I laid out a whole bunch of stuff here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed this before.
I'll give you a sec to read it.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit confused about your second point there because
Yeah.
so is the intended use case for this right now is the Helm CLI, right?
Yes.
Why does relative paths matter for that, given that the Helm CLI could just work around that internally?
Okay.
Like, users will not directly see all the internal paths or whatever the actual API is responding with, right?
So when we do an API, it will be hit by other people, I imagine. I mean, sure, Helm will do it, but will other folks use it as well? And I find that when people can poke behind the scenes and see this stuff, they tend to use it. And so, of course, that begs the question of, do we want to care about them or not? And how so? Because if anybody else touches this API besides the Helm CLI, they're going to start running into paths in the response that don't make sense because they're relative to other paths and things like that, right? And that's the problem. So do we even prioritize them? That's the first thing. And mine is if we do set something like API v1 search, which I think we should do, I would expect people to possibly want to use that to search for stuff. I don't know if they will right away. I mean, isn't this what always happens? People do something like this? They create a browser plugin or something else that does this stuff?
So one thing that we could do here is make sure that any paths that aren't related to the chart service are absolute. So specifically for the icon paths here, we could make them absolute.
So how would we make them an absolute path if we're using Ingress to read to write the URLs and paths?
The Ingress itself is not writing the paths. The chart service is the one that's returning that.
But the chart service is the one that's doing it, but it creates it relative to the chart service, and Ingress creates it at like /API/chart service / right? And then, so that's everything that ends up at chart service has that URL path appended to it, right?
Sure, but all the chart service needs to know to create that absolute URL is what that base host name is. Because, so for example, to get that logo that you put here, it would basically just be hub.helm.sh/v1 assets, whatever. So chart service would just need to know what that hostname.
Oh, no. It's hub.helm.sh/API/chart service/v1/assets. That's the URL.
For the chart service, yes, but for the not for the assets, isn't
For
it?
the assets, it is, right?
Oh, in that case, it's just whatever the base. Yeah, so there's actually nothing that's pointing outside of chart service then, as far as I know.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
relative. So a client would generally know what base path. This is actually fairly common, I think, in APIs, where you know what the API path is, and then you just have relative URLs to that API path, the same one that you're calling.
But if you map the search call to /API/v1/search, then what do you do? Because assets is different from search. And do you then have to map assets in each one of those in to chart service as well? I guess we could do that.
I'm not sure I'm following what you mean exactly.
So the current path for these, right, is internally it's /API/chart service to point to the chart service and then the chart service and stuff. We don't want to leak that it's chart service to an external API, right? Because we don't want, if we ever want to change that, that's going to be tightly coupled into Helm clients. We want a nice facade on it. So whatever our implementation is, even if we change it over time, it's not baked into the URL, right?
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, that makes it a little bit more difficult. So the main thing I'm trying to avoid here is having to come up with a separate API just to do search when we can just reuse what we already have. But I do see your concern about just relying on chart service in case we want to change that in the future.
And another thing that I forgot to put in here is the current API actually looks for uniqueness. So if you've got the same chart in there 3 times because it's in 3 different repositories, only the first one ever gets listed. And
sure, but we can toggle that with a flag or query parameter that disables that.
Okay, so there was that. Yeah.
I need to spend a bit more time thinking about this, but I'll try to get back.
And then the other thing, and see if you can grab Adam on, right, is there's a lot of nesting in the current API response, which was the 3rd bullet. And this isn't mine, this is Adam. So I would suggest talking with him because, all that nesting in depth and all of the Go structs that'll need to be created and maintained for that, that are exported and doing that, that's a lot of complexity for a very small amount of data. And if it's everything we can control, should we have that complexity? This was one of the points that Adam brought up because I was just going to go stick it in a tool that generated the structs for me. There's a couple of them out there that'll do that. I'm lazy. But Adam suggested, can we get a much simpler, flatter response with an easier ability to navigate the objects? So even if they're all going to be exported, right? And they'll be, because you got to have that for JSON on marshalling. And then they're going to probably be exported in a package in case somebody else wants to import the package and use it. And so that's quite a complicated tree structure of information to navigate. Is there a better way to do that for end users who would want a search API? And I'm not saying I know that, but Adam was looking for actually something preferably flatter, if we could.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, partly the issue with this API is that we decided to follow the JSON API schema or whatever it is, which adds some unnecessary nesting in attributes and relationships and stuff.
But yeah, there's a little more than that. I mean, at one point it just sticks a whole bunch of at one point in the Go, there's just an interface, and then a whole bunch of stuff is just dumped into that interface that comes right out of the chart, right? That's stored in the database. And so it's got the latest release and all of its stuff. It's got all these properties and other things with different nesting levels. And it's just an interface in the Go code, and everything's just dumped on that. And there's like one thing that has a find and replace to alter the characteristic name or something. Otherwise, it's just flat stuck on there. It's an interface. And so I thought, so there's a whole bunch of nesting that isn't even accounted for in the Go code that creates the API response, but in the Go code that actually has to consume that response, that becomes an issue. In JavaScript, it's not, but in the Go code that have to consume it, you end up with a lot more nesting than you'll have generating it.
Which interface are we talking about here?
I don't know. At one point, it was like 5 or. Here, do I have an example? Hold on. I've done this enough. I'm sure my browser has. I'll look at that right at the top. So if you've got a tool that makes this pretty, it might make it easier to look at. But go ahead and take a look at the nesting and the details here. Like data and then having an array, that's kind of the stuff I expect.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with the JSON schema.
That's fine, but
unnecessary nesting with attributes and relationships.
But yeah, the attributes one and yeah, that's true. I guess I see.
But once you get to the attributes, you pretty much have everything that's just in a chart.yaml file, right? It follows the same interface as that. So it should be.
Okay.
It shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, in our case, we have to do that, and then we have to get into the relationships for the latest chart version for the information.
Yeah, I've worked with that as well, and that's a bit of a pain.
Yeah, and the JSON API stuff makes sense. I actually recommended that to somebody like a week ago, so I get where it's going with it. But
it's a nice way of structuring data. It ends up being a little bit more difficult to parse, but
yeah. Yeah, and so he wanted something a little simpler. Quite frankly, I mean, if we had the full URL or the full path from the base for things like the README and the values and the icons and things like that, rather than this relative path that's relative to the service, that may actually make my issues and anybody who consumes it much less, right? Because then all the paths in there make sense. Then you're just dealing with a lot of extra data in it. But a lot of it's just being what's pulled into the database and just stuck right in there, right?
But is the issue particularly that it's called API chart service? Like, do you just want it to be called something else, that path?
Yeah, the path for me is the issue because it exposes our internal workings in there, and now we're exposing it as an external API that's not just an internal API for Monocular or the Helm Hub to use. Now it's for other clients to use, which means you got to start worrying about their experience and how their experience is effective as you iterate on your thing and even make major breaking changes. You still have an external API that's hitting more things than just your UI. And so that experience and response and things like that needs to then be carefully controlled. Because say you create a whole new version of Monocular, get rid of the chart service, do something else, write it in PHP or Python or something, right? And say you go do something like that and your internal paths entirely change. Now any of those external clients that hit it have a broken experience, right? Even if the data structure changes, those external clients have a broken experience. Even if your front end and your back end all still work nicely together, right? It's a public API now.
Sure, but that's only because we consider the chart service an internal API today, which we could just consider it a more public API if we wanted to. I don't see why changing the name necessarily is important to that. I mean, effectively, we're making it a public API either way, right?
Yeah, and if we make it a public API, does the name make sense?
I don't really see why not.
Well, you had chart service in there, right? Which means they've got to know effectively what is the chart service and how does that our code, right? You don't want the organization of your code or the organization of your organization to affect the interface people have. It would be, you want something simple, smart, straightforward, right? That they can consume as consumers. And chart service shows the internal workings of how our stuff does. So if now we just start exposing it, we're exposing the structure of our current code, which isn't Monocular, it's a subcomponent of that, right? It's all about API experience. That's the reason I bring this up. And I understand it's trying to make the least amount of changes. And maybe there's a way I can go in with more of a scalpel and make some changes that will make this easier. But
I'm just wondering if we can make chart service more of a public thing, like, if we just add documentation on this is what chart service is, this is what we expect it to do. And part of this is already there, I think, because the code is there, it's open source.
Yeah, but people don't read the code. I mean, we should never say, well, you want to know how this API thing works, go read the code.
I'm not saying
never say
I'm
that.
saying
Yeah.
we can add documentation to
Yeah.
that to explain what chart service is, if that's the issue. I'm not really sure that masking it under a different path really helps there that much. We could do it, but I think it'd just be even more confusing, to be honest. And then I would prefer that Monocular directly, or the UI directly, use that new path that we chose instead of using a different path.
Okay.
I just want everything to use the same API.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about just having different APIs that could potentially have different implementations. Ideally, we standardize on one.
Okay. Okay. I'll go dig back into the JSON API and see when it comes to things like relationships, what that should be. Should it actually just be and relate, should it be a subpath? Should it be the full path? Things like that. I want to go look at that because it might be easier if we relate it to the full path too for end users. I don't know. I want the experience not to be confusing for people who've got to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if we had it as /API, I guess what would you replace that path with if it wasn't to be chart service?
Well, I mean, for the search, I'd want something like /API/v1/search.
Okay.
Searching the Helm hub. It's a simple thing that doesn't say, and you could swap out the implementation. I mean, you could do, 20 different implementations. Like you could have 2 different implementations running in the background, and then through that path, you could canary just some people through the new one, right? It gives you lots of capabilities, but it's a controlled API rather than pointing to a particular service that's running behind it. And I understand why it is the way it is now. I probably would have done the same thing, especially with just an internal controlled. I'm just thinking of now it's external public facing. And then like in the URL responses, I'd probably have something like /API/v1/asset/ the path to the assets, right? Because that, again, makes sense to an external consumer coming in.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So in a lot of ways, I'm just taking chart service out of the URL and adding a little extra to the path to get you the full path of assets. Maybe that's all I'm suggesting.
Okay. Yeah, I want to have a deeper think about how we can do that with the ingress, because if we can do that, I would also want the front end to follow that path as well. I don't think it necessarily needs to know the service that it's looking at. Okay. Yeah, this is good. I'll get back to you on that PR.
Okay.
We can continue the discussion there.
Yeah, and that's why I put it as a draft, because I just wanted to get the idea out there, and I was putzing around with code. Not that this is the right way to do it, just that I wanted to force the conversation. And I'm happy to go write code for it too.
We may want to flesh out a deeper proposal here about what we want the paths to look like and how we want things to look.
Okay. You want me to go throw something like that together?
That'd be great, yeah.
Okay. I can do that. Sweet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything else today?
I don't know if Jacob is still on the call, but he had a note about, he put a note up there that he had remembered there was an issue of the CRDs weren't being cleaned up in the
Right.
Okay.
It seems to be a perennial problem every time a chart that has a CRD hook gets updated. We got around it recently just by having Reinhard go and manually clean up CRDs in the cluster for each time we ran the PR. We had some discussion in Slack about potentially having this pattern of a utility chart that exposes a hook that can, and you just pass in through values for that chart, the CRDs that are actually created by the chart to be cleaned up. You could turn that on for CI runs. I'm not super crazy about that pattern, but the alternative right now seems to be that some charts have just implemented that logic themselves, and it's kind of a lot to maintain as part of the chart.
Yeah, there's actually kind of a second problem.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for somebody to install the same chart more than once in a cluster. And so if you install the CRD as part of it, then you, right, the second one to go in is going to throw an error. And so
Right.
that's the problem. And so there's kind of two ways we can approach this. One is you can check if the CRD is already installed in the cluster and do an if statement around it in your chart, except we don't have an API for that because we only look at resource groups, not individual resources. I've talked to Adam about it, and the whole idea now is, and I need to find time for this, is to go write a new capability that doesn't look for resource groups, but looks for individual resources by name and version. And you can go say, hey, is this resource in there at this version? Oh, it's already there. Skip it, right? An if statement. The other way to do this would be to have the Helm install or the CRD install hook look for the existence of a CRD and not overwrite it. But this also gets tricky because people are altering their CRDs at the same version. So they'll have a CRD at the same version, and then they may go in and change its characteristics. So
Yeah.
what do you do with this? How do you handle it? Do we make CRD install just, it's hard to make it idempotent because you can't, it's very hard to diff it and make sure it's exactly the same because depending on how it's installed, it may have different characteristics automatically added by some tools. And so therefore, how do you make sure it's the exact same chart with everything? Because lots of stuff adds characteristics to it. And so how do you do that? And so we probably need to either come up with a way to diff it and make sure it hasn't changed, or some, if we're going to build it into Helm, we should make it really smart. If we're going to build it into an if statement that people can potentially add into their chart, we can make it dumber.
Yep.
But we probably need to do something like that as well.
Has there been any discussion around that for Helm 3?
Yes. Finding somebody who wants to dig in and write it is what we're looking for. The capabilities one we could actually do in Helm 2 as well, because it would just be a feature add. We could do it in Helm 2 and 3.
Okay.
The code would be mostly portable. It just needs to get written.
The nice thing about the capabilities is it leaves it up to the chart author to decide how they want to treat that CRD.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that we should have a easy path for chart maintainers to not have to write all of that logic themselves, ideally.
Yeah, I tried to go write diffs at one point, and I spent a little amount of time to say, is the CRD in the cluster the same as the one that I have locally? And it turns out that that was really hard to get a good diff to see what was different. Because what you get in the cluster, the properties are going to be ordered different when you get it back. There's going to be additional properties added by certain things in the cluster. And so the next thing you know, you can deploy a CRD and then immediately check and you see actually that its content is a little different than what you have on disk.
Like timestamps and all of that.
There's all kinds of stuff. And so if you're going to diff it, you have to know what to accept and reject, what to check for, what not to look for differences. And that becomes hard. And so how do you throw an intelligent error or not to help the users if you're going to try and automate it? Like if you want to make it easy, you want to hide the complexity, but it's hard to hide the complexity here. And if somebody wants to chase that down, I'm very supportive of that effort. I kind of gave up after spending a little bit of time because I didn't have the time to dig in.
Is there a reason simply applying the changes instead of erroring out if the CRD already exists would not be a good option?
Of applying the changes? Well, what happens if somebody comes along and installs a chart a second time and they've got an older version of the CRD? And so now you've backpedaled on the CRD and maybe something that was added at the same version because people are changing things at the same version. Now the application that's already running in the cluster that needs the new changes stops working and breaks.
Right.
Because and this is all because people are changing their CRDs at the same version of the object they're creating. They are changing them, and they justify this is what they're doing in practice.
Yep.
That doesn't seem like a good practice.
No, it's not. And the
Right,
Kubernetes project says that's a terrible idea, and people are just doing it.
Well, another thought was that recently someone brought up that maybe we should be using Kind for CI testing. And that seems like a great way to punt on this if we just spin up a new Kind cluster every time,
Yep.
at least for CI. I do think we need a better solution in Helm itself for managing CRDs, or say that we're not going to, but
Using Kind brings in a whole other twist as well. Right now, we have to do OK to test on everything because it's all running in a shared Kubernetes cluster, and the test suite that we run is hosted by Kubernetes, the Kubernetes project. If you're using Kind, you can compartmentalize everything. Terrible to do, but we can probably totally abuse Circle, or maybe go pay for Circle, and then we can punt on the Kubernetes project doing this. You can remove the OK to test, and then everything just is tested, and people get immediate feedback. So there's a whole bunch of other practical reasons for looking at Kind, even beyond this, that may make things a little bit saner.
Yep. Cool. I was kind of assuming that we weren't going to be able to fix this in Helm 2, so I was looking for either potentially, like, it would be pretty quick to write a chart that exposes a hook that you can consume pretty easily, but just looking for maybe a little feedback whether that was something we really wanted to avoid, or maybe going with Kind is good enough for now.
Kind's an option. The capabilities, looking for the object and just skipping it. Granted, that's a little bit of extra sugar to add to every chart, but that's a possible for Helm 2 as well.
Didn't know about that as well, so that's good. Thanks.
We could do that. Yeah, and I tried to do it with the resource groups, but it's resource groups, not individual resource. So you can look like for the apps resource group, but you can't look for apps deployment specifically. That level isn't there, and that's what we need to do. Everything's there. I think I have open tabs for all the code blocks I need to import already. I just need to get around to writing that code.
Cool.
All right. Oh, good topic. Thanks for bringing it up. Is there anything else? We filled an hour. Sweet. I didn't think that would happen. Thanks, y'all, for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a wonderful
everyone.
couple weeks. See you back here in 2 weeks.
See you.
Bye.